Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the Elm City tick. The Elm City helps make Alice Mattison's stories tick. Alice has been writing and publishing terrific novels and short stories for decades while living in New Haven, and including New Haven in the stories. We get to see ourselves or our institutions or both. Well, Alice has a new novel. It's called Conscience. It's published by Pegasus Books, and it's hot off the presses. Yesterday, August 7th, was the release. I had a chance to read it, and I loved the book. The novel poses important questions about friendship, political violence, and truth in fiction. Alice Mattison is here in the studio to tell us more about that. Welcome back to WNHH, and thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask you to get real close to that mic, so you're almost touching it.
Yeah.
And I want to thank Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So, Alice, congratulations on your 7th novel, on top of a whole lot of published short stories. And again, New Haven's in there. I noticed Institute Library was there.
Yes.
But I didn't see any scenes in Clark's Dairy this time.
Well, Clark's Dairy, well, it's true. Clark's Dairy did exist during part of the time that the novel takes place.
I think the whole time, right? Because Hillary Clinton used to go to Clark's for milkshakes, right? When she was a law student in 1970s.
Yeah. But some of the novel takes place pretty recently. You know, like now, or
Clark's
almost now.
Oh, it's not a dairy anymore. It's just Clark's restaurant.
It's Clark Pizza.
Good point.
I don't know if anybody goes to Clark's Pizza.
They don't do it the way they went to Clark's Dairy. Clark's Dairy was a hangout.
Right. Yeah. And it's true that I did put that into my fiction. I think that was the first thing people really liked about my fiction.
Well, we're going to get back. It is, because we also said Clark's Dairy is in there.
Yeah.
But we are going to get back to this later in the show, because in fact, it sounds to me, tell me if I'm wrong, you were being intentional. You were telling yourself the time period that these scenes take place. There's no more Clark's Dairy in New Haven. You didn't want to put a scene in 2015, let's say, at Clark's Dairy when there was no Clark's Dairy in 2015.
Oh, no, that's right. Of course not. I wouldn't.
But you're saying, of course. But some of the characters in your novel would argue that it doesn't matter if Clark's Dairy was open then.
That's true. And I don't agree with them. Yeah.
All right. I want to get into that a little later. But first, I want to tell people about what your book is about. It's another book about a book borrower. You had a book called The Book Borrower.
Yeah.
And a lot of what happens in the scene revolves around borrowing a book that was written years ago, a novel, thinly disguised novel about an important event in these characters' lives decades earlier. And one of the characters has never read it. He's married to the other character and is finally coming to grips with reading it and what happened in those days. Yeah. And the same thing is for the main character. So the book is, I think the book talks about how the written word and books themselves can force us to grapple with unfinished business, past actions, unresolved relationships, and who gets to tell our story and whether you can forgive yourself. But what I'd like you to do is, can you give me a summary of the plot so that we don't give away, because I'm always nervous about giving away parts so people won't enjoy it.
I will try. The main narrator, it's got 3 narrators, and the main narrator is a woman named Olive Grossman, who is living in more or less the present day. I'm sort of imagining about 2013 in New Haven, and has been married for many years to a guy named Griff. And their life is proceeding. And she meets a woman named Jean Argos, who is a social services person and runs a drop-in center for homeless people in New Haven. And her husband, Olive's husband, Griff, is involved, is on the board, and then becomes the board president of that organization. So that's the present story of the things that happen with them. But Olive is mostly thinking about the past and about her opposition first as a high school student and then as a college student to the Vietnam War, and her friend's opposition. And the thing that happened in their life is that she had one friend who became a very, very intense, violent revolutionary, and another friend who wrote a book about the first friend.
Thinly veiled fiction about what happened.
Yeah. And Olive has been dealing with these books and her memories of what actually happened all of her life. And the book begins as that the famous book based on sort of on real life is about to be republished. And so, first of all, she's supposed to write about it. So she's thinking about it. And her husband has never read it because he's scared of it. And at the very first scene of the book, he barges into her bedroom as she's naked and getting dressed and having to leave town, and he's just decided now is when I want to read the book. And so that's what starts the plot going.
I want to see if we can add one other part of the plot, and I don't want to give away too much. I
Yeah.
think it's pretty important that the story you told in the 60s that
Yeah.
they're coming to grips with now
Yeah.
echoes some real events from the 60s when you had the Weather Underground and other groups
Oh,
of
yeah.
white radicals who are trying to decide how far do we go when you
Yes.
feel like war is so unjust and the system is so broken. And
Yes.
what we can't understand today is back in those days, people really believed there might be a revolution in this country.
They really might. Yes.
And they had to make that decision. Am I revolutionary or not? And do I commit violence?
How far would it go? And this is the, I guess, the central issue for the characters in the novel. They are intensely opposed to the Vietnam War. It's about 1968, 69, 70. They've been marching and shouting. That doesn't seem to be doing any good. What do we do now? And there's all kinds of dispute among them about, do we turn violent? Do we not? Do we keep on marching and shouting? Is that crazy? And so on. So that becomes this huge question for Olive, and then looking back for Olive and her husband.
And can we just say, I think this doesn't give it away, that what the hardest part for them to come to grips with is how actions they were involved in led to murder of somebody.
Yeah.
We're not going to say who or how or who did it. And actually, we're not saying who did, because I'm not doing being cute here, but that's interesting and then also their own role, their friend, and what happened to her.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting about that is you're reading two books in one, obviously. So we don't find out until the end of this book what really happened back then. And the way we find out what really happened back then is that we gradually find out what is in this book that's being republished about that time.
Right. Yeah.
It's also the other story in the book is about today. So like so many people our ages, Alice, we're both roughly baby boomers at either end of this.
Yeah.
So many of us now have lives in New Haven where we've tried to figure out how to preserve our ideals, but no longer under what we would, I think, fairly say is the mistaken idea there's going to be some kind of left-wing revolution in America. So we have lives, and pretty respectable lives, middle-class lives, but we still wrestle with the questions from our past and the stories and our actions today.
Yeah.
So that's why I think there's a really universal cast to this book, not only because so many of us live that, because people of any age live that in some way. But what I love about this is that, so we're in the book, it's fun. You keep reading because you want to find out what happened back then by finding out what happened in that book. And the way we find that out is what's going to happen in another story, which is what's happening now, I guess 2013, with this couple in New Haven trying to keep their lives together. And there's a great side story about the social service agency, which echoes to all of us who follow New Haven, about drop-in center for the homeless and this controversy about whether they should let people sleep there. So that's great stuff.
Thank you. Thanks very
We're talking
much.
to Alice Mattison about her new book, Conscience. It just came out yesterday, folks. And I can, with no hesitation, urge you to get it because it is a great read. It's going to make you think and it's going to make you feel. It's by Alice Mattison, our great New Haven author, has written 7 novels, many short stories, living in New Haven, often writing about New Haven here on WNHH, your home for community radio, 103.5 FM. So I was wondering, Alice, we talked about this before we went on, if you could read one extensive excerpt.
I will do that.
And I've excised one scene from this excerpt because it happens near the end of the book. So we're not going to tell you one long paragraph because that gives away a plot twist. But let me set the scene and tell me if I'm setting it correctly, Alice. It's about a dinner at an Indian restaurant on House Street. You don't name the restaurant.
Well, I don't know if I was thinking House Street, but okay, we'll let that
But that's
pass.
where like 9 of them are. That's why I pictured.
True. Maybe
4.
it is House Street.
2013, there were 4 on House Street.
Okay.
If you count the corner of Howe and Shell. No, what were you thinking?
I actually
you usually
did not
name places. You didn't name it.
I didn't think of a specific restaurant.
What I love about it is that we could all
Could
feel
be
like
House Street.
we're at that dinner because often when you meet friends for dinner, there's always a lot that's unsaid. Everybody knows part of each other's story, but not all of each other's story, so they're kind of guessing what happens. So let me just tell you who the characters are. We had mentioned that the main characters are Olive Grossman and Joshua Griffin. They're a couple. They lived through this episode in the 60s. Now it's 2013. She's trying to reread and write about this book about what happened back then. Josh runs the social service agency. He's grappling with what happened back then, is about to read it. With them at dinner is another couple. Jean works for Josh, or Joshua runs the board of that social service agency. Jean runs the social service and she is now friend with Olive as well. And then she's going out with this guy, Zach, who's a doctor who had a past embarrassing episode involving the daughter of Olive and Joshua. So there's all stuff at the table. Like some people know what happened back then, others don't.
Mm-hmm.
Some people know what's in the book, others don't. Some people know what's being fraught about talking about the book and how to read it, and some don't.
Mm-hmm.
And some know, 3 out of the 4 know about this embarrassing episode in the past, but the 4th doesn't. So that's what I love. That's the mark of a great writer. Gets you in that scene, brings so much to the head. So now at this unnamed Indian restaurant, let's hear what happened, Alice. Alice Mattison reading from Conscience.
Okay. This is Jean talking. She's the director of the social services program, and she's talking about this dinner. She always speaks of Olive's husband as Joshua. Olive always speaks of him as Griff. He's got 2 names. He's never called Josh, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Either Joshua or Griff. Yeah. So Jean says, and here I go into the book, I think Olive wants to talk about the book. So I ask Joshua again if he's finished it. Olive looks at me as if she thinks I'm crazy. And I remember that this book is a complicated topic for the 2 of them, even though Joshua says he loves it, even though Olive knew the author. There is a long silence. Then Joshua says, I did. And what do you think? I say, while Olive is saying, where did you get it? You didn't read my copy. I keep it under lock and key. I borrowed it from the New Haven Free Public Library, Joshua says, slowly enunciating the library's formal name. Then he looks at me and says, that's not how it happened. How what happened? What's in the book? It's not true. You mean about you? I say. There's been this hint all along that one of the characters is or isn't based on the younger version of Joshua. You mean about you? I say. I don't count, Joshua says. No, about someone else. I thought it was a novel, Zach says. It is a novel, Olive says. Of course it's a novel. Yes and no, Joshua says. It's a novel if you didn't live through certain events. If you did, it's not quite a novel. You mean, Zach says, it should be accurate about verifiable events? Of course. And despite its charm, it's not, Joshua says. But that's not what I mean. He's stirring his food with his fork. I'm eating away. Charm, Olive says. I want it to be accurate about the people it's based on. Is that fair? I say, looking up from my plate. Yes, it's fair, Joshua says. I love this book, but it takes off from the life of someone who became well known. It shouldn't lie about her. It doesn't use her name, I say. I don't even know her name. There was silence. Her name, Joshua says now, was Helen Weinstein. I vaguely heard the name. But the character of Harry, I say, immediately regretting it. This is more important. But that's troubling. Yes, the book glorifies violence. My entire life, Olive says, has consisted of you caring about the character of Harry. And that's not much of an exaggeration. But I'd never read it, he says. The other is much more important. It lies about what Helen did. Now I want to know more. About Helen Weinstein, about Griff, and the character of Harry. But Olive pushes her plate away, folds her arms on the table, and says, fiction establishes its own truth. What? I say. What does that mean? It's a work of the imagination, Olive says. You can't argue with it, not about accuracy at least. Wait a minute, I say. I expected her to say what she said before, that the book is inaccurate about the character of Harry. You're not happy with this book. You're mad at this book. Olive ignores me. In one novel, history is accurate. In another, it's distorted but recognizable. In a third, space aliens assassinate the president. Each thing is true within each book. But how do you know which kind you're reading? Zach says. If a book says Abraham Lincoln was president in 1980, how do I know if the author is doing something tricky or he just doesn't know? I laugh at that, and Zach, belatedly listening to himself, adds, could Lincoln have beat Ronald Reagan for the Republican nomination? But Olive is serious. The book tells you, she says. It tells you how to read it. Like a Hollywood movie with a secretary living in a fancy house. You know whether you're supposed to wonder where she got the money. The fancy house could be part of the plot, or it could just be real estate porn. She stole it, Zach whispers. I'm serious, Zach, Olive says. I don't know why Olive cares so much, or why she's defending the book. But Zach ought to know enough to shut up. Yes, Mrs. Griffin, he says. He's almost sarcastic. I've never been Mrs. Griffin. Sorry, I forgot. Ms. Grossman. My cousins wanted her to hyphenate, Joshua says mildly. They didn't mind if she kept Grossman, but they wanted Griffin, too. Grossman Griffin is a mouthful, I say. Is it possible that we can get away from these topics? That wouldn't stop my cousins, Joshua says. The waiter asks if we want anything else, and Griff orders tea, which nobody else wants. We are silent as the man clears the plates and dishes. We watch Joshua drink tea. I think we're okay. Then Zach says, why does the author owe Helen Weinstein anything? It would be different if she claimed it was true. But I gather she never did. Now I sort of understand. I do like novels to be true, I say. Maybe we can turn this into a conversation about how everybody's taste is different. Nobody glares at me, so I keep going. I figure a novel might be true. I do. I shouldn't admit this, but I don't even want to know what's not true in this book, which I loved. To me, it's all true. Then I remember our previous conversation and add lamely, not the character of Harry. That never seemed true. So once you know who it's about, you think it's true about her, Zach says. Maybe the problem is that the author said who she was writing about. You want her to keep it a secret, Olive says. It's not a bad idea. But Val was the author of the book, their old friend who's now dead. But Val talked all the time about Helen. Helen is the main character of the book. About Helen as if all she'd changed were the names. At the time, people would have guessed she meant Helen. Anyway. Aren't you contradicting yourself, Olive, I say? Whose side are you on? Olive sighs and picks up her wine glass, which is empty, and glances around for the waiter, then seems to think better of it. My personal preference, she says, has nothing to do with the ethics of writing a novel. Helen was my friend. This is the first I know of that. I thought Valerie Benevento was your friend, I said. Not really. Not really? No, says Olive. Helen. She continues, but novelists don't owe anybody anything. That's what it means to write a novel. That's art. Nobody can complain that a novel lies. Are you kidding? I say. Well, of course people do complain, Olive says, but no, I am not kidding. And then something at the table changes. Joshua, who does not raise his voice, says, the end of the book. He pauses. For the second time in our acquaintanceship, I think he may cry. And it interests me that the first time was when he found this very book. The end of the book glorifies violence, he says again. It romanticizes violence. I love this book. It's not always accurate, but I love it until the end. It doesn't have to tell the truth about everything, maybe, but that's one truth it should tell. What truth, I ask. What's wrong, he says, his voice shaking, is wrong. What is destructive, he pauses, destroys. His tea is still in front of him, and he clutches the cup but does not drink, blowing people up, shooting people. It's wrong when it's terrorists now, and it was wrong when we did it. There's no difference. He picks up the cup this time, but still doesn't drink. It's not like a play. You don't wash off the red makeup. It's blood. Helen knew that and did it anyway. You've heard that. Olive now turns to him, and when she speaks, she sounds as if she too may cry. You say that what bothers you most about Val's book is the way she wrote about Helen? The fake Helen? That's not what bothered you. That's what bothered me. She pauses. I'm the one who cared about Helen. I suffered over Helen. You can't have Helen. She sniffs and her voice wobbles. Helen was an idea to you. You didn't love her. You didn't love her and lose her. You think I didn't suffer over Helen? He says. You still think that? Joshua's intensity and Olive's scares me. Maybe the novel does glorify violence. I'm not sure. At the end, I was sad for Hannah. Hannah in the book is the name that the real person was called Helen. I didn't think she was a villain. I gather my thoughts. I have to disagree with Joshua, though of course I should keep quiet. I search for the right words. That sounds unforgiving, I say. A lot of what we do at Barker, which is where she works, is based on the idea that if you think hard enough, nobody's unforgivable, no matter what he did. Otherwise, we'd throw all our guys out. Plenty of them have been violent. I stop to see how he's taking it. It's central to everything I think. This matters, I finish. Well, that goes without saying, Olive says, but Zach interrupts her. Oh, for heaven's sakes, he says, much too loudly. I see a couple of heads at other tables turn in our direction. Would you let that go, please? That forgiveness shit. Forgiveness doesn't help anybody. Would you like to be? His voice becomes loud, even nasty. Forgiven? I don't want anybody's forgiveness for anything I've ever done. He glances at Joshua. But why not? Olive says. She has calmed down. If Helen were alive today, and I wish she were, well, I don't know about forgiving, but I think we could all work out a way of understanding. You understand what Helen did? Joshua says, suddenly turning his head to look straight at Olive. You understand? Maybe not quite forgive. Maybe not quite understand, she says, but okay, Zach, I say, because Olive seems to have fallen silent. How about understanding? If you don't want forgiveness, don't you want understanding for whatever you've done? Of course, I'm thinking about what he did to Olive and Joshua's daughter, and I know he is too, and so are they. Why doesn't Zach want them to forgive him? Can it be true that he doesn't? I don't want forgiveness or understanding, Zach says. I lead a fine life. Nobody needs to judge it. Then he says, I bet Helen Weinstein didn't want forgiveness either.
All right, that was an excerpt from Conscience, the new novel by Alice Mattison, New Haven's Alice Mattison. We can claim her, even if her characters argue about whom they get to claim in the book. And her new novel, Conscience, has just come out, August 7th, published by Pegasus. Just go to the bookstore or Google it. You'll find it. I highly recommend you listening to Alice on Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM, 103.5 FM, live stream, newhavenevent.org. You know what I realized while I was listening to you read that? It must have sounded so different to the listener than it read to me while I read it, because this comes at the end of a book with lots of plot. So the reason I asked you to read that, because it brought up so many big ideas about fiction that I wanted to ask you about.
Mm-hmm.
But I realize now that the reason that scene had power was because those big ideas didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of hundreds of pages of plot of real people, not real people, within the book.
Yeah.
People's lives and things that happened to them. And that story was culminating in this dinner with 4 people.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get that.
I think that was a good piece to read. I'm glad you asked me to read it. I mean, and I hope that the listeners will put up with the fact that it must be confusing. But it's true that when you write a novel and then you start giving readings, and it usually turns out that the only thing you can read is the first scene.
Because it's got to build up.
Because it builds up. Or it's confusing. So I'm kind of glad that you pushed me to do it. And as I was doing it, I thought, I wonder if I could actually do this in readings. I don't know.
Well, I want to ask you about it.
Yeah.
I want to break out 3 points you make in there.
Okay.
So one of the quotes is Joshua says, it's a novel if you didn't live through certain events.
Yeah.
If you did, it's not quite a novel.
Yeah.
And Zach says, you mean it should be accurate about verifiable offense.
Yeah.
So like earlier in the novel, there's an argument about the Tet Offensive. And in the novel, within the novel, where they're arguing about how true it is, they have it in 1970. And a person points out that's way wrong. And it is true if you follow the Vietnam War. I mean, I think it was 60, 68. Yeah. So like it was a big difference.
Or 67, I think maybe 67.
Big difference about who was president, what was happening in the war. And so one of the characters says, but it's fiction. Why does it matter whether the facts are true? I don't expect it to be true. In fiction, you can have a talking elephant, or it might have happened if the South won the Civil War. Isn't that the idea? what would be your response that it doesn't matter what year you put in for the Tet Offensive?
I think it matters what year you put in for the Tet Offensive. And you asked me at the beginning of this conversation whether I would put in something that wasn't
right. Clark's Dairy
right.
being open in 2013.
Yeah, I tried to be historically right. I even tried to be historically right about the weather. I mean, I don't know if I did that with this book because I didn't say what year it was, and I'm imagining it's somewhere around 2013, but it's not very long ago. But it's not, it's not since 2016. But I do myself try and be as accurate as I can about the things that happen.
Except that the people aren't real people.
The people aren't real people.
So you're not accurate about that.
Of course not. Yeah.
But you're accurate about what street Clark's Dairy is on in your previous things.
Exactly. Or if I say in other novels I've written where I'm actually saying that this happened on,
What do you mean about the weather? Do you go up and look at the weather?
I look at the New York Times weather report. Yeah. Actually, in this novel, I am accurate about
when they forecast, or did they tell you what the weather was like the day before? Like, if you want to know what it was like on August 15th, you go to the August 16th New York Times to see what it ended up being.
No.
So you trust the weather forecaster?
That's true, and
so
that's
your
probably
facts
wrong.
aren't so good. That is wrong.
Probably
that's
wrong.
not fact checking.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
true. I should
just
probably
giving you a hard time.
No, you're absolutely right. But I do. I mean, like, there's a scene in the novel, in the part of the novel that takes place in 1968. That's on Election Day of 1968, and that's based absolutely on real.
You looked up the weather.
I don't remember if the weather is mentioned, but I think I did. But they go to a show at the Pierpont Morgan Gallery, the Pierpont Morgan Library, and there's a rally that Olive and her friend Helen go to. That rally happened, and I got all the footage out of it. Or earlier when they're high school students and they go to a protest at the Waldorf Astoria. That's all based on
So in
real
fiction,
fact.
we suspend our disbelief about certain facts. So as that person was saying, there might be a talking elephant in a novel, and that's legit. Because your reader is in on that. We're saying, I'm going to pretend there's a talking elephant. Or if there's a historic novel about there's an alternative fiction novel where they say, we're going to pretend like Philip Roth's Great Plot Against America. We're going to pretend Lindbergh became president.
Right.
So you know that that's the ruse.
It's as though the author is saying, hi, folks, we're in a slightly different universe now. Kind of the way the way a film might do that, like a comedy routine, a comedy film will have things happen that are way exaggerated from life. But you know what sort of film it is.
So I kind of feel like you have to get your reader in on it, because I think the challenge for a novelist, which is why I think it's so much harder to write fiction than it is to write nonfiction.
Yeah.
Because it's harder to make people believe it. And what I mean by believe, you're not asking them to believe there's talking elephants or that Joshua is a real person. You're asking them to believe within this world you've created.
I do want them to believe that Joshua's. I mean, I don't want them to believe that he's an actual.
But you
person.
believe he would say what he said.
But I
and he'd
want
do
them
what he's
to
doing.
feel as if he's a real person when he's
right.
When he's
and that's a hard thing to convince us. Like when you if you're a journalist and you're at a public meeting, you take down exactly what someone said.
Right.
But if you're the novelist, you have to convince me somebody really said that in your pretend world. Once I've suspended disbelief, and then you really have to capture that dialogue, which is so hard. I've done that as a I try writing fiction, which was very bad. And then I found dialogue so hard because you have to really summon the language the way it would be. And again, so when I'm reading it, I want to know it's the right year of the Tet Offensive. Unless I know the ruse is we're going to pretend the Tet Offensive is 2 years later.
Right.
But the other suspended reality is, it works the other way in nonfiction. So nonfiction writers feel okay about fudging some facts. It drives me crazy. So Obama had that great book about Dreams of My Father. But he combined characters in it. And I was so upset later because I was moved by what I believed was the reality of the book. And he had good motives. He didn't want to embarrass a woman who was in a relationship with. But then you don't know what else you can or can't believe.
Mm-hmm. The memoirists I know are very divided on that. And I've seen them almost come to blows on that question. Can you include, say, a conversation you don't really remember, but you remember the gist of it?
Yeah,
and put that in.
That's true. I did write one nonfiction book where I did allow people to try to recall a conversation that was had, and I used those in quotes. But then when there was something I needed to not put in to protect someone's privacy, I didn't pretend something else happened or combine characters.
Yeah.
I just made it not as good a book by not having that in there.
Yeah. Yeah, when I have written memoir, I do write memoir, and when I do, I try to be. I mean, memoir, it means it's what you remember. So I put down what I remember, which may be wrong, but it is what I remember. So I don't.
But
I don't
you said when you said it was
recreate
controversial among
conversation.
memoirists about inventing the dialogue or
Yeah.
the best of your memory, what I think is more controversial is don't so many of them think it's okay to combine characters? That's the thing that drives
Yes.
me up a
Yes.
wall. How
Yes.
could you do that and call that nonfiction?
Well, I mean, I think, I think the people who do it would argue that if you're clear that you're doing it, it's okay. And in a way, that's what we do when we write. Say,
That's true.
this novel is not based on real people. My novel is not based on real
Although
people.
it's based on the kind of people
It's
we
been a
know in
kind
New
of people,
Haven.
right? But there are no, it is not based on actual persons. But say you wrote a novel about your actual family and you put in things that were true of your family when
Yeah.
you were growing up, but also invented other things. I mean, I think if you call it a novel, people will understand that it's partly invented.
But you know, Tom Wolfe.
If you call it nonfiction and you put in invention, then I think you need a disclaimer
Well, that became a big
on the
controversy
first page. Yes.
in the period of when you write
Yes.
the story that takes place out of the action in your book. In the 60s, Tom Wolfe. In the 70s, the New Journalists, so called themselves.
Yeah.
They took the tools of fiction, which was great, to nonfiction, do character, plot, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then they felt comfortable inventing stuff and calling it nonfiction.
Yeah.
And one of the big famous cases was Tom Wolfe, who died recently, was writing a profile of the New Yorker editor, William Shawn. And he was mad Shawn wouldn't give him an interview. So he invented a story that he didn't tell people he was inventing, that Shawn was the original intended victim of the famous murder kidnappers Leopold and Loeb, and saying they gives you so much insight into him. And he did that with impunity. And the argument that's being made and is made today, and I hear it often when my kids are at Educational Center for the Arts, they heard it in their classes, the essential truth. They're saying that as long as you're capturing what a person's like, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you're saying it's fiction based on the person or nonfiction using fiction techniques, as long as you're capturing the larger essential truth of what stuff is like, it's okay to make up the particulars.
I think it's okay if you say you've done it. So if on the front of the book it says some of this is made up. Vivian Gornick has been doing that lately. She got into trouble with her book about her mother, Fierce Attachments.
That was a good book.
It's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
And somebody accused her of having made some things up in it. And it turned out that she had only a few things, but she had imagined her mother talking to somebody whom Vivian Gornick herself had met, but the mother had not been present. I think I'm saying that accurately. So she imagined that her mother was present when her mother had actually not been present. And I've noticed that since then, Vivian Gornick will have a statement at the front of the book saying some people in this book have been combined.
So while it's important to do that,
and I think that's important to do. Yeah, I really do.
I would disagree with you respectfully, Alice, because Tom Wolfe did that, and Norman Mailer. They wrote about the Gary Gilmore case, that Truman Capote in Cold Blood. They did the disclaimer. This is they had some really cheap out, like this is fiction, nonfiction, or whatever. But it was called nonfiction. Or if you say it's a novel, but it's the real name of the people, tons and tons of real facts, and becomes the story everybody reads about an important incident, how they come to understand it. And I think it's a cop-out because they didn't do the hard work of making it accurate in every way. And I believe you changed the truth, that even with the disclaimer, everyone had the disclaimer at the Gilmore book. Everyone knew about In Cold Blood. Yeah. But then when you read it, you forget that in 2 seconds. And when you think about the case the rest of your life, not only in terms of your responsibility to the people you're writing about, but your responsibility to the truth. Because we read these novels partly to understand the human condition, our own lives, and the world around us. That's certainly
so
true.
You would say that an author shouldn't write such a book? I do disagree with you.
I think because you're lying and you're fooling people, even with that little disclaimer, like, by the way, I'm not really intending to hurt you, and then you hit the person over the head and give them a black eye. In those Gilmore books, in Cold Blood, in The Right Stuff, this is the story everyone believes, how they understand that reality. And even though there's a disclaimer, not so much of it is true, and the names are true, the places are true, facts that were in newspapers that may or may not be true. But then when they're deliberately making up things like that Wallace Shawn kidnapping, that skews it. And I think you haven't done your job. You've punked out, and you've really done a disservice to the truth.
Well, I don't agree. I mean, I think you do have to say what's true and what isn't. But beyond that, it seems
Or
to
what
me
about the novel within the
write any
novel
book.
of your novel, the ethics? You can
Yeah.
talk about the ethics surrounding novel. Helen was my friend. Olive says that scene. So they had this friend who had this traumatic incident. It's going to be very interesting when you find out what it was and the decision she made. And this was Olive's best friend, and it mostly toward her. And then they had this third friend, sort of friend, who was the kind of person you meet in these situations who gets all the glory by exploiting a situation. She was going to write a novel about this famous incident because she was sort of friends with these people. And she was going to take advantage of that relationship to write the story that gives her the fame and the money. That becomes the story that so many people read to believe what really happened, even though they're calling it fiction. It was very thinly veiled fiction. And she wanted you to know, and this happens a lot in real life, like with Mailer and the others, they want you to know that I'm really writing this about the real story, nudge, wink, this is the essential truth, the larger truth. And she took such advantage of her sort of friends to write a story in a way that would get her readers and fame. And the larger disservice is that these are important issues about political violence and people's lives, decisions you make. And you're corrupting that search for truth by lying to people. And you're really doing a disservice. You also have responsibility to people you write about, don't you? That's my argument here. I think your book disproves your point by talking about that other book.
I certainly agree that there's something deeply wrong with the book within a book.
For that reason.
I so believe, I guess I have the same mixed feelings that Olive does. I so believe in freedom of the imagination that I would never say to anybody, it would be wrong for you to write a particular book.
That's a good point.
I mean, I think we have to imagine what we imagine and write what we want to write. And then maybe revise it, maybe change it when we publish it, maybe include a very clear announcement. And the woman who writes the book
but not just a
book,
Vivian Gornick type disclaimer saying,
well, maybe not.
Not only is this not all real people,
she
I have deliberately said things that were different from the way they happened in every way to make this a story.
Well, but she's writing about private life too, and that is different from writing about public life. Val in my book, the novelist in my book, is writing about public life
and private. Those are
and
her
she
friends.
she also lies in interviews. So I think she's pretty much a bad actor.
Although some people would say that novelists are liars, the way that Janet Malcolm says all reporters are con men because we're trying to get people to trust us to tell things they don't want to tell.
There is something about writing fiction that I think we're a little bit hypocritical if we pretend that it's a completely blame-free occupation. Of course we're liars.
No, but you're not. I think you tell the truth in your books.
I try to tell the ultimate truth. Sure.
These books get at larger truth, not just about what the role of truth in fiction, but about how we come to grips with whether we can forgive ourselves and others for our mistakes in the past, and how we make decisions about how we translate our ideals into action. And by not lying, I think you told a truer story. I think you're letting these other writers off the hook too much.
Well, I don't.
But I will. We do agree that you're listening to Dateline New Haven on WNHH 103.5 FM, and the great Alice Mattison is here, New Haven novelist with her new book, Conscience, a great read. You made a decision to tell the story. You made two interesting decisions on how to tell the story.
Yeah.
First of all, that taking of going back and forth from telling a story about today,
present and
by
past.
gradually going to the past. That's not a new idea. It's a very good idea. I know that Dara Horn's done like a whole series of those going back centuries in her stories. And about a book within a book. Tell us about what people have through another book. You also had 3 different narrators that we go through to tell the story from each of their perspectives as we pick it up. Why did you make those decisions to tell this story?
To have 3 different narrators.
And to have it go back and forth in time through another book.
The back and forth in time, I can't really remember. I think that was very much part of the original conception, that the first minute I knew there was going to be a book, I think I knew it was about somebody in the present day remembering the Vietnam years. And so it would be both about the present day and about the Vietnam years. So I don't remember making that decision. The 3 narrators.
So does it kind of make itself?
That made
Do
itself.
stories evolve
that was
in your mind
That
over
was kind
time?
of the given.
Okay.
Yeah. The 3 narrators. How did Jean get into that book?
She was interesting because you're kind of, as the reader, not knowing everything.
Jean.
I do too. I do too.
I think I've wanted lately to write about work and about women at work. I wrote an essay about this when my last book came out, a short essay that came out somewhere about. I want more novels to be about women doing jobs. You know, it's hard to find a working woman in a novel, and
So true.
I wanted my novel to have a real working woman.
Jennifer Egan's had a couple of great ones of working women lately.
Yeah. Who I wanted somebody who makes mistakes and has decisions to make and so on. And so I think maybe I wanted to do two things, and so I decided to do them both. I don't actually remember that decision too. Thank you.
And you made that.
I hope so. The third narrator is Griff himself, who was not going to be a narrator. I mean, Griff is a black man. I felt shy
with a white wife.
With a white wife, a Jewish wife. I felt shy about writing, you know, about a black person. What if I do something wrong? And I thought, well, but he's going to be a fairly minor character, and there he is. And it was important to me that he be a black man.
He's not a minor character at all.
Well, he didn't want to be a minor character.
Right.
And the more I wrote this book, the more important he got. And then he began to talk to me, and he began to say, I need to talk. I need to talk. And he was kind of saying to me,
so interesting.
You are writing about my marriage from the point of view of my wife. What does she know?
And about his life before.
And I really did not. I really was taking Olive's word for it about her marriage. When she says my marriage is this and this and this, I thought, okay, she's the narrator. That's what it is. And then Griff wanted to talk, and he is a black guy from New Haven whose father and grandfather are clergymen, but he is an atheist. But he is a lot like his father, whom we meet in some respects. I mean, he's a person of great seriousness and great moral fervor and kind of sort of religious fervor about not having religion. And so
about social change.
About social change. And when I wanted to when I finally said, okay, you can talk, I somehow thought that I could write Griff if I read The Devotions Upon Emergent Occasions by John Donne when I was about to write him, which is a 17th century book of religious meditations. I guess what I was feeling was that Griff was responding to something. The King James Bible was written around the same time that John Donne was writing a Christian meditation. So I would read some of those, and then so at first Griff was always talking to God, whom he doesn't believe in. And then my agent said, he doesn't have to always talk to God. So sure enough, so he stopped doing that. So he doesn't just do that. But the more Griff talked, the more I learned that there were things going on with my other main character, with Olive, that I didn't know. And
that's fascinating.
That his way of thinking about her. Well, the thing about writing fiction, Paul, is that it's in our unconscious minds are the books that should get written. But of course, we have all kinds of shyness and fear and, notions of different kinds, and we get in our own way. So the trick is to somehow allow what's already there in the back of your mind to emerge. And so, I mean, to me, it seems that Griff is a real person who wanted to talk. I mean, I know that Griff is an imaginary person and that it was something in my own mind that wanted to talk. But that's how it felt, as though he was real and he had another point of view. And sure enough, he did. And then he became more and more important. And when people began reading the book, they all, in one way or another, down to my editor, Katie McGuire at Pegasus, who was absolutely wonderful, said, there needs to be more of Griff. There needs to be more of that story. And so that was the area of the book that got revised more and more, was the marriage of Griff and Olive.
Jerry Modell will be finding out how she thinks about Griff's voice, because she writes in that she just received my copy of the book in the mail. Can't wait to read.
Oh, wow.
Thank you for listening, Jerry.
Oh, wow.
So, Alice, listening to you, I realize partly why you're such a great writer, because these characters clearly are real people in your mind, and you live with them, and you help find the voice there, and you learn from them. What's so interesting, you talked about you didn't want to do anything wrong being a white writer writing about a black character. in my little bit of trying to write fiction and failing at it, I remember how difficult it was for me writing about Black character. Not that I wanted to not do anything wrong, but again, it was how someone talked. I felt like I didn't want to insult or stereotype. But you picked someone who is an educated person who had a very similar background to yours in some way, who was involved in social change, lives in New Haven, middle class person, very supportive, I guess, cares about nonprofit agencies. Your husband, runs one, and speaks like an educated person, which I think helped get over that barrier. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't have trouble with the way he talked. It was a decision to let him into the book.
Good
that was
decision.
big. Yeah, but then once I did, it was fun to write him.
The book was conscious, and boy, is it fun and interesting and gripping to read the new novel by Alice Mattison. He's here on Dateline New Haven. I can't let you go before talking about New Haven. So you invent a social service agency again, as you often done before, called Barker Street Social Services, and it's a drop-in center for the homeless. And you have two women at work in that. You have this woman, Jean, and then one of the most interesting side characters is Paulette, who's the number two, who's African-American and white-run agency, who's pushing her own ideas of how it should go and being forceful about it and making the people who run it confront whether to let her do it, whether they're being controlling, whether they should listen to someone. And it gets controversial because she wants to let someone in who then causes, I think, a fire, if I'm not mistaken.
Don't give away the end.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, that wasn't. Oh, okay. I won't give that away either. This happened in the last story. You wrote a short story in New Haven Noir, which I thought was great. It was also about a woman at work at a social service agency.
That's true.
And the way that the white people who run it, whether they're exploiting the people they're trying to help or not, and whether they're listening to them and who's controlling whom. The story in New Haven Noir is about the professor who was, writing the study on this kid. And I just found that very interesting. Do you have an experience of that personally in either working in social service agency, being close to people beyond your husband who work in them, or volunteering?
I volunteered at the community soup kitchen for many years.
Yeah.
So I was just there once a week, just absorbing, I guess, because it turns out that I have all sorts of thoughts about that community, and I am married to somebody who's worked in it all his life. So
I was helped a lot of people over the years. Yeah, very humble.
Yeah.
I love his approach. You also have. Were you in Brooklyn in 1969? And when you were involved in anti-war activism?
I was not. I'm somewhat older than the characters in the book. In 1969, I was in Modesto, California.
What were you doing?
Well, my husband Ed had graduated from Yale Law School, and he had been working in social service agencies here. But then when he graduated, he got a job at California Rural Legal Assistance, which is the legal aid program that works with the migrant farm workers. And so we went out to Modesto, California.
Chavez?
Well, it was working side by side with that organization, with Cesar Chavez. Yeah. And so I got a job in teaching in a community college. I had just gotten a doctorate and in English, and in those days it was easy to get a job in a college. So I just wrote to them and said, "Can I have a job?" And they said yes.
Wow.
And I went and I taught for 2 years I had taught in a community college here, and I taught for 2 years in a community college there. So we were in California for about 4 years, including 1969. Yeah. Right. So my experience of 1969 was very much opposing the war, but it was in California. We would go to the Presidio, march on the Presidio in San Francisco and stuff like that. And
you also mentioned the New Haven Independent in your book. Thank you very much.
Did.
I was honored.
I did. I was a little worried about that because I had the New Haven Independent writes a story, and it's not quite complete. And I thought, I know if Alan Appel wrote that story, he would.
Well, I want to push back on
better.
you. First, I want to thank you. I'm so honored.
So I put in a disclaimer saying their stories are more accurate.
I wanted to disagree with your disclaimer.
Oh,
after I gave you such a hard time before.
Okay.
So in your disclaimer, you wrote, "The Independent's actual stories are checked more carefully than the one mentioned in the novel." Now, I felt really guilty when I ran that. Because the story you described, I would have run as is.
Oh, really?
So I think I don't think I'm giving away too much. The source for the story is, I believe, on the record.
Yeah.
Who's the number 2 person?
It's the number 2 person of the agency,
and it was really important information. So if someone to me is a number 2 person at agency, and is on the record saying a fact about something interesting they're going to do now, ideally, as a reporter, I will talk to other people in the organization to find out if they're all on board.
Right.
That's what a really good reporter does when you have time to do your stories right. And often, if you happen to know, if you're rooted in a community, you know other people, and know that there might be something going on there.
Yeah.
But in truth, Alice, we don't always know that about every story we're doing. And I have to admit, I felt a little guilty. I think this is, again, why you write truth and fiction, in my opinion. So I read that, and I saw my limits as a journalist.
I see.
And I said, I definitely would have run that story. And then when I was embarrassed reading your gracious note, I thought, and if I were a better journalist, I wouldn't have run that story.
Well, I think you're a great journalist.
Well, I'm not asking you to say that. I'm saying that I honestly do believe it would have run.
Okay. Well.
And it shouldn't have. So you did write. That's sort of like sometimes when you're a reporter, when you're writing things, you're not intending to hurt someone you know or criticize them. You're just writing truth. And sometimes that makes someone feel bad because the truth, but it's important they see that. You wrote truth in fiction here. You described what would have really happened. You apologized for it after because you're a kind person. But what was useful was that you wrote the truth. And then I read it as someone who knows it's the truth, and I can learn from it.
Okay, well,
so that gets back to our discussion about truth and fiction, huh?
But anyway, people will find out about the New Haven Independent if they don't. And, if they don't live in New Haven, they might want to learn about New Haven.
That's right. They might believe we write these really good, really well-researched articles when they read the acknowledgments. Plan for the book. Now, Washington Post, you said, gave you a good review. I haven't read it yet. What did they say?
Oh, it was great. I mean, he said the book was timely. And, and about thinking, I don't remember exactly his words, but about thinking about an unjust government and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the people are in that question now, what do we do now with the benefits that we learned in the past?
The book had many, many titles, and he starts out by saying Conscience is this kind of grim title. Who wants to write a book called Conscience? But then he decides that, conscience is the big issue.
I'm with him. That is a good title.
I thought it was too grim a title for a long time, and this book had about 6 different titles.
What were some of the others?
Oh, I wanted to name it after the book, the book within the book. So it was called The Book Val Wrote, and Val had various names, so it was the book so-and-so wrote. And then there was a point when it was called The Private Life, because one of the big issues in it is, are we allowed to have a private life, or should we just, be marching and protesting all the time? And then there was a point at which I remember saying to Edward, well, I really should call it just Conscience, meaning, of course I can't. And we looked at each other. I thought, I guess I can. And I think that's post-Trump. I think it would have seemed too heavy a title before. Mm-hmm. And the book, I've been working on this book off and on since 2011.
Wow.
So
was Clark's closed yet in 2011?
I don't remember.
So I'm wondering if you wrote Clark's out in order to be accurate.
I did not write Clark's out. Clark's was never in it. Clark's is too frivolous for these characters.
I don't know. I think they would have had late night. You think they would have been at bars or the Gypsy or something?
I can't remember where they go.
Yeah. Or they go to the Indian restaurant.
They go to the Indian
restaurant. And are we
restaurant.
going on tour?
I'm touring Hamden and New Haven and Boston, New York. Yeah, I'm doing 3 readings in New York.
Excellent.
And one at Newtonville Books in Boston, and in New Haven, I'm going to be at the Mitchell Library. I can't remember the day.
Is it this month?
It's in September. And then October 2nd, I'm going to be at Best Video with Sandy Kahn Shelton, who writes as Maddie Dawson. And so we are old friends, and we have done this before. We read from our new books. And
have you ever thought about switching places and reading from each other's books?
No.
Oh, okay.
But that's a possibility.
So you're going to be out there selling books?
Yeah.
I encourage everyone right now, before you finish listening to the show, just go to wherever you buy books, Amazon, whatever, on the web. Type in Conscience. It's an easy name to remember. It's a great new novel by Alice Mattison.
I think they should go to an independent bookstore.
Yes, go to an independent bookstore. All right. So which one? Like
I don't know whether anybody has it, but ask them if they're going to get it or something like that.
Okay, go to an independent bookstore. And April Bernard writes, love hearing Alice on the radio, and it's how I met her more than 20 years ago. Great interview. Thank you for listening, April Bernard. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing financial support. Thanks to our guest, Alice Mattison. Independent bookstore, or however else, please read her new book, Conscience. You will feel more like a human being when you're done reading. We're going to take it out with Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.